Hello and welcome to Realish Racing. My name's Dan. If you're a follower of our channel, you'll know we run a sim racing club. We produce videos of our races, some of which have been broadcast on the television. If you're new to the channel, I suggest you go and check them out, because I've got nothing to do with them, which means they're absolutely brilliant. This series, though, is going to be something a little different for the channel, a little bit different for our club. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to be doing a full playthrough of a retro classic that even the most hardcore of sim racers will probably have some kind of affiliation with, Gran Turismo 2. Over the years I've done dozens of playthroughs on Gran Turismo, mainly the first 4 games in the series. So why have I chosen Gran Turismo 2? Well, the first game's a bit too old school, a bit limited in terms of cars and tracks, like 90% of the cars are Japanese. So it's a little bit limited. Gran Turismo 3 is very similar, even though that's probably my favourite game in the series, which may be a little bit odd. And I haven't chosen GT4 because even though it's got a nice selection of cars, a nice selection of tracks, it started to get a bit stale for me, and it's sort of where the game series became a bit more of a sort of a monument to motoring rather than, this is actually a game, it needs to be good. You could B-spec your way through half of the races, and it was a little bit bloated. And 5 and 6, the less said about them, the better, to be honest. Whereas Gran Turismo 2, yes, it's glitchy as hell. It's got quite a few problems. What Gran Turismo game hasn't, to be honest? But it's a little bit different. It's got loads of cars on it and tracks that weren't seen in other games. So it's a little bit unique in the series. So for a racing fan and a car fan, I thought, and a game fan, that would make it would be the most interesting to watch. Now, I'm not just going to play through it, choosing the best cars for the best races, because that would be pretty dull, because it's fairly straightforward. Any Gran Turismo game, if you know what you're doing, they're not hard. Whenever I play games, Gran Turismo, I like to do it in a different way. So I've done playthroughs on all the first 4 games. I've done lots of playthroughs on them, using different methods, where I can only use cars I've won, can never use cars I've won, can only use cars from or have to use cars from a certain country, can only use obscure cars, have to use a different car for each race, use as few cars as possible, all that sort of thing. I've tried loads of different ways, and it makes it really fun. It gives the series great replayability. I'm going to do it different to all of that this time, because when I first played Gran Turismo, I was like 8, 9, 10 years old, and when you tune a car at that age, the idea of making a car better is just more power. All the money goes on mufflers, turbos, chips, everything like that. Because when you're a kid, bigger numbers, that means better. It's logical. It seems logical. And if you can put stuff on that makes your horsepower go up, yes, that makes the car better. The suspension and brakes, what? They don't make any numbers go up. Why would I use them? Now, I know a bit better now. I like to think anyway. Now I'm in my 20s. And when I went back to an old Gran Turismo 2 save recently, I found a bright yellow Plymouth Superbird. It had all the upgrades on it, all the power upgrades, and it was really good to drive, really fast, but, it topped out at 120 miles an hour. What use is that in racing? With just a bit of knowledge, if I'd had a bit of knowledge at that time, I could have changed the transmission, put some better brakes on it, and, it would double the top speed. You could use it on all sorts of tracks. And that got me thinking. As a kid, I would do it with just power upgrades, or more or less anyway. So now, what happens if I do it the other way around? What if I use just the sort of suspension upgrades, just the transmission? So that's what I'm going to do. Anything that increases the power, I'm going to ban myself from using, basically. So if I want to tune a car, I have to do it through my knowledge of, well, I say knowledge, my interpretation of suspension, brakes, transmission settings, all of that stuff. Tyres, I'll try and use tyres as a last resort, because I think in the early races I don't think you have tyre wear, and if I just whack racing softs on, it will just become really easy. So, if I'm really struggling, I will use tyres. But obviously in races where there is tyre degradation, then that'll be a dilemma I have to go with. Do I want to go hard and be slower, or do I want to pit more and use the softer tyres? As you can see in this video, I'm blasting through the license tests. I've got them out of the way straight away. As with all Gran Turismos, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the license tests. I quite like the sort of novelty of being forced to do these things. You can do a dozen races. Can't do another race because you have the wrong license. So you go on, you do the license test, and you're being taught to brake in a straight line again. Pretty insulting, but you know, that's a quirk of the series, and I quite like it. And I lamented its disappearance a bit, but you know, when you're going through it again, you don't want to have to go through all these licenses, so I'm sparing you and me a bit of pain and just blasting through them straight away. You'll notice that I've already done the licenses. That's because the first time I recorded them, Shadowplay just shat itself basically. So I went back on and got a bit more of the footage. So yeah, I've done the licenses twice. It didn't take me as long as I thought actually. I thought it was going to take me, you know, a good couple of hours, but you know, you can blast through them all in 40-50 minutes. They're not difficult. You know, if you wanted to go for golds on all of them, it'd take longer, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to use the prize cars, which brings me on nicely to what type of cars I'm going to use. As I've already said, I'm not upgrading the power on any cars. So, you know, I'll buy a car, that's the power I've got to deal with. Now, a lot of races on Gran Turismo 2 have power limits. So, if I buy a car that I think is under a power limit, but then once I get back to my home garage, it shows that it's got more power and it's then ineligible, then I'll reload before I bought it. I'm not going to do that if a car turns out to be bad, because that's a bit cheaty. But if I'm lied to by the showroom basically, then I will reload. But I'll make it clear as I'm going along what's happening there. You know, I'm going to try and use a mixture of sort of obscure and unlikely cars that, you know, you may not necessarily want to choose, because I want to make it a bit challenging for myself. I don't just want to pick the most obvious cars, even with this restriction I've imposed on myself. You know, regardless of if they're a prize car or not, I'm not going to be fussy, but I won't use a prize car just because it's convenient. You know, if I win a car and think, oh great, that'll be good for the wagons, I don't want to do that. If I use a car, I want to use it because I want to use it, not because it's easy to use it or convenient. And there is another car rule, which I'm going to save for a bit later in the series, you know, when I come up to it. So that's something for you to look forward to. This episode's pre-recorded. I've done all this footage and then recorded this afterwards, but the rest of them I will be trying to do as live. There'll be some editing obviously, but I'm really new to all this, so bear with me while it's shit, because as the series goes on, hopefully it will remain at this level of shit and not get shitter. That's the best outcome. And yeah, so I think that's about it. Yeah, so next episode coming up, I'll be buying my first car, going through some of the early races, and seeing basically what's what. I don't expect the early races to be too difficult because they never are, but when we get to some of the more niche stuff, then there will be a bit more of a challenge. So as I'm playing, I'll try and I'll chat about the series a bit, and you know what my thoughts on the game are, on what the cars are. If this sounds good to you, then I'll see you next week. If not, bugger off. Like and subscribe. Dan out.